The recent Joker film starring Joaquin Phoenix was a real pleasant surprise for me. It was one of the best Western films I've seen in a long time. But what was more pleasantly surprising was the positive response to the film's soundtrack. It's an intense, ambient, cello-driven soundtrack by Hildur Guðnadóttir, and it's basically the kind of music that I listen to on a daily basis. So I put together a list of 6 albums that you should listen to if you enjoyed the Joker soundtrack. So way back, probably around 2007, when I was obsessed with Björk and pretty much all things Icelandic, I discovered a band called Moom. Now, later, Hildur Guðnadóttir joined Moom for their latest 3 albums, one of which is called Sing Along to Songs You Don't Know. This album is kind of a mix of a lot of stuff that Moom has done in the past, but it also moves them a bit in a new direction, in a more poppy direction maybe. I would say the album is kind of split. Around half the songs are more solemn, and then around half are a bit more upbeat and happy. Of course, the tracks that are more reminiscent of the older stuff have the kind of glitchy trip-hop beats to them, but then there's also standout tracks like Blow Your Nose, which have a more sort of ethereal feel to them and are very much string-led. There's a lot of intriguing instrumentation in this album that keeps it interesting and different throughout. Although it's not quite as depressing as Joker, and will probably get more depressing as the list goes on, I thought that this was well worth mentioning because Hildur Guðnadóttir is actually in this band. The next album utilises quite similar instrumentation in some ways, such as with marimba and cello, and it's Esmerine La Lechuza. Whilst Moom has a lot of sort of glitchy, maybe sometimes heavy drum beats, Esmerine is a lot more chilled, with sometimes some big build-ups here and there. They're also a bit more on the classical side. I would probably class them as neoclassical / post-rock, because they consist of mainly 2 percussionists, a harpist and a cellist. I saw these guys live, and I don't know how they managed it, but they bring along a marimba, a vibraphone and a big harp with them on tour. Anyway, quite a few of the songs on this album feature cello lines that sort of swell up into a big crescendo. That, as well as the often sombre tone this album takes, really made me think it was a good fit for this list. Next up is a band called Grace Cathedral Park. I think this is the only album they've done. It's called In the Evening of Regret. I would describe this band as slowcore, which is pretty much a minimalist branch of post-rock, featuring really drawn out chord progressions, often strumming guitar chords, and really squeezing as much effectiveness out of a melody as you possibly can by building up expectation of what's coming next, just from those repeated patterns. There is a 15-minute song on this album, and it really does make you think that it's going to be the same all the way through. But when it does finally change, it has all the more impact because it really does play with your expectations, and it's all about sustain and release and things like that, which is basically the fundamentals of music. Again, I really do feel like this kind of music is music to think to reflect on things, and the sombre tone is just bittersweet in this album. Now, I've got to fit in a local band here, and this is a 2-piece. I've worked with both of them in the past in musical projects, and this is Helicopter Quartet, A Walk in the Dark. The instrumentation in this is basically just synths, strings and guitar, and they utilise that to the absolute maximum. Again, here we have some intense, long, drawn-out build-up sections, and I mean, strings are just perfect for this kind of thing, I think, which is why I think the Joker soundtrack was so good in its use of strings. Strings have such great dynamic range, and I think that Helicopter Quartet utilise that perfectly, more so with the space that they leave rather than the space that they're playing in. I don't know, maybe that's just a journalistic, pretentious thing. Strings can be so versatile in terms of texture as well, and the strings player in Helicopter Quartet, Chrissy Caulfield, uses a variety of effects pedals to expand that even further. A Walk in the Dark is basically the latest album from Helicopter Quartet, but they've made a lot of recordings over the years, and all of them are pretty much just as good as each other, and all interesting in their own ways. So check out Helicopter Quartet from Leeds. Next up is a soundtrack for another film that really blew me away, and I think it was probably the best film of its year. Maybe the best Western film, obviously there were Korean films that year, so... But this album is A Ghost Story by Daniel Hart. The movie is about a ghost who's watching over his, I guess, ex-girlfriend, and it's a really sort of heartfelt, sad movie. I don't think this movie could have worked with like your standard Hollywood score. I think it needed something that was really, really sort of basic, but not in a bad way, because this soundtrack is so heavy on the strings. There are just a few motifs that kind of come back in a lot of the songs, but other than that, it really is an experiment in harmony, and you will find that those ever-changing harmonies will sort of guide you through the film in a way. Again, there are the occasional intense epic build-ups and swells, but these come very rarely in this film, but when they do come, it's so effective and really made me, well, I was gripped throughout the entire film, and the soundtrack was a big part of that. And now, last but not least, if you want to get really, really depressed, then I highly recommend the debut album from my favourite band ever, a Silver Mount Zion Memorial Orchestra, and this album is He Has Left Us, but Shafts of Light Still Grace the Corners of Our Rooms. No, it's not. It's He Has Left Us Alone, but Shafts of Light Sometimes Grace the Corner of Our Rooms. I should have rehearsed that one. Anyway, this album consists of 3 of the main members of A Silver Mount Zion, Ephraim Menock being the main one, and he conceived this album as a sort of a love letter to his dog, who died of cancer. Other than that, Silver Mount Zion always have very political themes in their music, and they don't really portray much hope for the world, if I'm honest, and this is probably the most depressing album that they have. Again, there's a lot of playing around with harmony, just like plodding piano chords, and maybe the strings will come in and sort of do little flourishes and accent the chords that are playing. Again, this is a bit of a slowcore album, but there are moments in it where drums kick in or stuff like that, and you know, the experience is heightened, but mostly it's just sort of a contemplative album that you can drift away into your own thoughts while listening to, but underneath that, the solemn tone is always there, basically. As an introduction to A Silver Mount Zion, I probably wouldn't recommend this album. It's certainly a hard album to listen to, but if you enjoy the Joker soundtrack and listening to it from a musical standpoint, you will probably enjoy this album as well. So go see what you think of these albums, download them, stream them, buy them, watch them on TikTok or whatever it is people do nowadays, and I hope you enjoy. And do let me know what you think of the Joker soundtrack or any of this music. I've been Jake of theretroperspective.com. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.